Town of Granbury wound up sitting right where it does. And if you read our Facebook ads, you saw that it involves, it's kind of like today's headlines, it involves money, power, politics, scandal, fortunately no sex that we know of. So we're not going to have to do that. But what I'm going to do, I want this to be kind of like, since we've got a fairly small group, and we are going to have question and answer at the end, but interrupt me, if there's any questions, since we're, won't be a problem, just raise your hand and we'll try to answer any questions. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to give you like a 30,000-foot overview of what happened, how the events, how the town site was selected. And then I'm going to tell you about the Landers and the Nutt families. Like, Abel Landers, your first county judge, and some of the other people, you have an autograph picture of him. He was my great-great-great-grandfather, hence he would be my daughter's fourth, he would be her fifth great-grandfather.
And you said he was the first county judge?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Looks like Willie Nelson.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought, like saying a new rag or whatever. But it is, if you zoom in, I have the original, or not an original, but a scan of the photo. And if you zoom in, he's got an injury coming up here on his cheek by his right eye. So we think that's really a bandage. But anyway, we're just gonna have an overview. I'm gonna tell you again about the Landers, the Nutts, kind of those two families. And I'm not gonna get into real detail about that. We've got another expert, Melinda Ray here, and she's gonna do another one of these talks in the future and get in. She knows a lot more about my family than I do, I promise you. But then I'm just gonna sort of tell you my personal story and kind of how I came to be aware of this and how I'm connected to the Landers and the Nutts. So, Hood County was formed in 1866 by the Texas legislature. They took most of the land from Johnson County and a small part of Erath, and in its original form, it included all of what's now Hood, and some of them. It included all of current Hood plus what's now Somerville in its original form. The first requirement was to elect the county officials, to hold an election, elect the county officials, which they did. And Abel Landers was elected the first county judge. We have actually upstairs, we have a reproduction of the election tabulation from that very first election. The other thing we're going to do, kind of when I get through telling you about the Landers and Nutt family, we're actually the last two pages in your handout that they gave you, I've highlighted. We're going to go over these passages from the Hood County history by Thomas Ewell. I call it it's the Bible, the Gospel of Ewell, if you're studying Hood County history. So we're going to read over those passages, or we're just going to kind of unpack those a little bit and see what Ewell had to say about all this. So Hood County's formed, they elect their officials. Abel Landers is the county judge, and the next task is they're supposed to select a site for the county seat, for a place to put the courthouse. And it's supposed to be within 5 miles of the geographic center of the county, because obviously travel was difficult and dangerous in those days. The Comanches were still reigning. So travel was a big deal, and it was supposed to be located within 5 miles of the center. So anyway, all of a sudden, people start jumping up wanting to donate land for the new town. There was a site at Acton, someone at Acton wanting to donate land, or someone at Thorpe Springs, someone, if y'all know where the Peninsula development is, that was called Stockton at the time, and that's the site of where Granbury was before it is now. It was in the development of the Peninsula, or right in that area. Oh, and then another site was called the Center, and it was west of Comanche Peak somewhere, and it was technically probably truly closer to the geographic center. I don't really know exactly where, it just says west of Comanche Peak. And then there was another site, Andy Walter's place, I believe it was, which would be somewhere around Indian Harbor, somewhere down there. Again, that would probably be closer to the geographic center if you include Somerville. So when you hear this, that all these people want to donate their land, you think, wow, these are really, nice people wanting to give away their land. Well, I'm sure they were nice people. But the game, it was really a real estate game. It was, you donate, you own a tract of land, you donate a piece in the middle of your land. Oh, with, of course, the Lambert Nutt site where Granbury sits, that was one of the competing sites. But the game was, you donate a piece of land in the middle of a larger piece of land, and as the town grows, your property becomes more valuable. So I know, personally, when I started kind of reading about this, I didn't tend, I'm thinking of these people on the frontier, living hand to mouth and farming and ranching and fighting the Indians, and you don't tend to think of them as real estate speculators, but they were. And so, anyway, so what they did, so they had an election, and the site that was selected during that first election was the center, the location was the center. And again, we'll read in more detail about that. I can't remember all the details, but we'll read about it in Yule there. So they had the county officials convene, to declare the results of the election. And before they could do that, Abel Landers adjourned the court and said, no, it's not, he just adjourned the court. He said, no, not really. So that election just went by the wayside. So they had two more elections, and this is basically the same thing happened. Abel Landers just arbitrarily says no. And the deal was, okay, the Nutt brothers, Jesse and Jake Nutt, and Tommy Lambert, this creek back here is known as Lambert Branch, and Tommy Lambert was another early settler, and he owned land kind of to the north and east of Granbury. The Nutts owned kind of west and south around there. But it turns out that Jesse and Jake Nutt were Abel Landers' nephews. And not only was Jesse his nephew, but he was also his son-in-law, because Jesse Nutt was married to Abel Landers' daughter, who was his first cousin. So nevertheless, that once you kind of get hip to that, it starts making sense. So anyway, Abe threw out all these elections, and people started getting upset, rightfully so, I would think. And so Abe says, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to call in impartial commissioners from surrounding counties to make this decision. And of course, Abe, I guess, was instrumental in getting they picked the commissioner from Johnson, Erath, and Bosque. And guess which site these commissioners picked? Yeah, we're going to now since, which is what Abe wanted to do. So that's kind of, that's the 30,000 foot view. That's what happened. It turns out that's a good site to put a town. And, the reasons they cited for neglect or rejecting some of the other locations were a lack of water. There's one in the center, which I don't think there are any creeks or water sources. So, it's a pretty valid reason for doing that. But the real reason is because Abel Landers wanted his nephews and son-in-law to prosper. And however they prospered, whatever money they made from selling all that land, apparently it got frittered away before it got to me. I think I have the deed to 2 cemetery lots or something. So now that you kind of have the 30,000 foot view, I'm just going to tell you about the Landers and the Nutt families. Again, this is just a broad sweep overview, and then we'll go into more depth in another visit. But the Landers and Nutt families were connected going back to the late 1700s in North Carolina. Then they kind of followed the westward migration, and each time they hop to a new spot, some family members, some stay, and some move on. So they go from North Carolina to Kentucky, correct me if I'm wrong, and then Bedford County, Tennessee,
North Carolina to Tennessee.
North Carolina, Kentucky's in there briefly somewhere, because I think Abel was born.
Yeah, on the way out there.
And Bedford County, Tennessee, and then the southwest Missouri, Newton County, Missouri. And from Newton County, then some of the family members started moving here to Texas, to the frontier in the mid-1850s, mid to late 1850s. Now, Abel Landers, again, the guy on the front there, his sister, Sarah Ann Landers, she married David Nutt. David Nutt, David Lee Nutt, his son, built this house. And Jesse and Jake were his sons also, that had the Nutt House building on the square. So anyway, these two families are closely connected, and the Landers, Landers and his wife, Abe and his wife had whatever, 10 or 11 kids, and David Nutt and his wife had, likewise, as was the case back then, they had 9 or 10 children. Well, it turns out like these kids are all first cousins, and it turns out that 4 sets of them get married. So there's a lot of interrelatedness. Now I'll tell you kind of the personal side of the story. So, you know, when I grew up in Granbury, and went to Tarleton, graduated from Tarleton, then moved away for 20 some odd years, and I've been back for about 20 some odd years. I live in Cordova. But nevertheless, at some point when I was in, and I didn't really care about history like most kids back then. I mean, you know, my mom and grandmother would try to tell me a little bit, and I would go, that's great, you know, what's for something, what we got, you know, stuff like that. But at some point when I was maybe, you know, a junior, senior in high school, it dawned on me that both of my grandmothers, my father's mother, Sarah Sue Landers was her name, and she married my grandfather, who was Cody Martin. And my mother's mother was Maddie Landers, and she married Bob Mangold, and they had the Mangold Toy Factory, so that was my grandmother. But anyway, at some point it dawned on me that both my grandmothers had the same maiden name, you know. And when you're in high school, it was like, they thought, well, this is kind of odd, but okay. And, you know, I asked my parents, I said, so, like, are y'all related or something? And this was before computer genealogy, and they said, yeah, way back there somewhere, but, you know, we don't quite know how. And sure enough, they didn't know how. But in later years, my grandmother on my mother's side, Maddie Mangold, she gave me I didn't bring it with me. It would be like a edition of Yule's History of Hood County that was published in the 50s, I guess, in the early 50s. And I guess she knew at some point somebody would get interested in who all these people were. So she had made notes in the margin. You know, she would say, this is your great-great-grandfather, this is your great-great-great-grand, you know, she had made all these notes. And so my dad passed away when he was like 60 years old, and my mom died suddenly when she was 68. But up until then, I thought, well, that's somebody else's job to keep up with all this family history like everybody else does. So, when my brother and I were, you know, kind of going through the house and cleaning things out, we came upon all the old family pictures and so forth. And, you know, I asked my brother, I said, do you want these? He goes, no, I don't want them. I said, well, I don't either, but we shouldn't throw them away. So I said, let's flip a coin. Whoever loses has to take it. So I lost. And I lost. So I had these boxes, and I took them home at the time I was looking for work, and I stacked them up in the garage. And at some point I thought, well, you know, I guess it's my turn to figure out all this stuff. So I did get, you know, all the material out and kind of start reading through it. And that's when I was reading the story about the selection of the town site of Granbury. And I thought, you know, and then as I put together the people and how they fit together, then I went, oh, this makes sense. You know, this was a money deal. It was a real estate deal. But, you know, the brochures, some of the little tourist brochures you pick up around town, you know, they'll say, oh, the land for the town of Granbury was donated by Tommy Lambert and Jesse and Jake Nutt. And it stops there, and you go, oh, these guys are real nice, you know. And they were, but at the end of the day, it was about money, and those folks were pretty savvy developers. I guess now, let's just kind of, any questions up to this point, any comments?
Where did they serve until the courthouse was built? Did they just?
Well, now, and Melinda, you feel free to jump in. Okay.
That's me too.
Out at the community of Stockton, but you know, when all this is going on, the community of Stockton, which is out where the peninsula is, they held court. I don't know if they didn't have a courthouse. I'm sure it was just somebody's barn or cabin. And if you read Yule's History of Hood County, Abe Landers was, he was pretty much a character, and he was known to, you know, adjourn court, or he would adjourn court and they would regather in the saloon. There was a saloon. And in fact, let me tell this quick story about just so you'll have a little more of his background. When he was in Missouri, in Newton County, Missouri, there's a mill, like a grist mill or whatever. It's called Jolly. Now it's called Jolly Mill. I don't know what it's called right there. But the name Jolly Mill came from the word jollification, and Abe Landers is given credit for coming up with that name because when on Saturdays when the local farmers would bring their grain and stuff to be ground, Abe he would furnish a jug of whiskey, and they would have fist fights for entertainment. So he was, in fact, I told Andy Rash when he was county judge, I said, Andy, you know, you need to keep that tradition. Buy a jug of whiskey and let's have fist fights on the square. You would draw a crowd. So, okay, let's just kind of unpack what Yule has to say, and then we'll do some more questions and answers. Okay, and I've highlighted, obviously, you're going to take these home, you're free to read all you want. I just sort of highlighted what I consider the most relevant parts. So we'll start with that first paragraph. Granbury, christened by the legislature as the county site, was yet, however, an uncertain identity. There were several places within the prescribed limits that aspired to the honor of bearing the name of that distinguished general. Evidently, not so much because of the honor as from the desire of the owners of the several sites offered to gather the material advantages to be derived from being the county town. So right there, Yule tells us it's money. Now, you know, again, he writes in a different style, and if you read that without knowing, you know, you go, well, what's he talking? You know what I mean? But once you put the puzzle together, you realize, oh, I see the material advantages for the money. Then, you know, the next paragraph talks about the county being formed. Okay, this Constitution provided for the election of the usual county officers with a tenure of 4 years. And from the most reliable sources of information, the following men were elected in our first election. Abe Landers, County Judge. A.J. Wright, Sheriff. Now, A.J. Wright, that's A.J. Wright's picture hanging right there on the wall. And A.J. Wright's wife was a sister of the Nutt. So Abe had a connection to him too. His wife was Elizabeth Nutt, am I right? Okay. Alex McCama was clerk of the county court. John Morris, district. Oh, Peter Garland, treasurer. Okay, Peter Garland, and he's going to be a good topic for another visit like this at some point. Okay, David Lee Nutt, who built this house. His wife, Sue Garland Nutt. Her maiden name was Garland. She was Peter Garland's daughter. And Peter Garland, he was involved, I won't get into it a bunch, but he was involved in a massacre basically up near Palafina County. He was a well-known Indian fighter, and it involved Texas Rangers and Rip Ford, R.I.P. Ford, they called him, and the governor of Texas. It was a big deal. Anyway, so Peter Garland was the treasurer. Gideon Mills, assessor, collector of taxes. Okay. Soon an election was held for then it was talking about, you know, the next responsibility of locating the county site. Excuse me. Okay, so soon an election for that purpose was ordered. And several places which stood as candidates were the center, that's the one I was telling you about west of Comanche Peak, understood to be just west and near Comanche Peak. North Springs, Stockton, Lambert's Branch, and the site offered by Andy Walters at its place on the river east of Comanche Peak. At the first election, the center was carried by a large majority, but the result of this election being unsatisfactory to those in power and influence was for some reason not officially declared. And it is said that when the Commissioner's Court, presided over by Judge Landers, met for the purpose of ascertaining and declaring the result, the final act was averted by a preemptive order from him adjourning the court. So that's what I was telling you about. He just said, no thanks, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to read that whole next paragraph, just the part that I've highlighted. He says, with many other men of influence and shrewd capacity in favor of the Lambert Branch where Thomas Lambert and J.F. Nutt had offered a donation of 40 acres as a town site. Oh, a scheme was proposed and carried into execution, evidently by the friends and promoters of the Lambert site, whereby Judge Landers named 3 commissioners of our sister counties, Johnson, Erath, and Austin, to meet in Hood County and examine into the merits of the contesting points and decide between them. This commission consisted of whatever, Colonel Blackberry, Bosky, Isaac County, Ralph, Williamsburg, and Johnson. Oh, and see, he says, this extraordinary commission in no manner known to law. In other words, this isn't like how you're supposed to do it. After meeting and considering the matter, made up a decision by a vote of 2-1 in favor of the Lambert and Nutt Commission. So, that's what happened. Flip to that next page. Okay, again, I encourage you when you get home, read the whole thing and make a little more sense. I'm just trying to hit the highlights here. This long contest was not only animated, but in some measure became acrimonious, engendering bitter feelings between some good citizens that had its subsistence only when they were no more. In other words, these people stayed mad until they died, I guess. Whatever may have been the methods altogether employed for the attainment of the result, and however, long afterwards, a controversial spirit of discontent remained with some. Yet time and other circumstances seems long since to have established beyond question the wisdom and stability of the selection of the Lambert and Nutt donation as the site of Granbury. So, and you kind of have to imagine Ewell was writing this, I guess, in the late 1800s, and a lot of Abel Landers' children were still alive, and so he's kind of having to tread a little cautiously on what he says, and that's why, I think he might not go into even more detail than what he does, but he spells it out there. There's absolutely no doubt that Abel Landers was kind of in cahoots with his nephews and his son-in-law to get this site selected as the town site so that when the town grew, they would prosper. So, questions, comments, observations?
The proximity to the river then, so people could travel.
Well, yeah, the other sites that were contending, I don't know exactly where all of those were, but it's, it turns out that, obviously water back then was a big deal, but they could dig wells, I guess, back, rock lined wells back then, but it was difficult. And there are a number of springs, like, that come out of the Doyle Springs Road, where I grew up, when I was a kid. It's right down there off 144, Market Street. There's like a couple of streams that come out of freshwater streams, and then there was another one back behind Plantation Inn. There were streams along the bluff that were good freshwater sources, and in fact, that's why I grew up hunting areas also along the bluffs on the Brazos. But the Brazos is too salty to be good drinking water, and that's why the Native Americans chose to have their camps along the Brazos, anywhere there had to be a junction of a creek or a stream or a stream coming out of the bluff. But anyway, the same held true for the settlers. They needed a good, freshwater source. So ultimately, it is a good site, and now the others may have had good water sources up too. Now the one known as the center, that's what those commissioners said was their reason for not picking it, was because of the lack of water. But, be that as it may. So, anybody else? Any comments? Yes, ma'am.
We have water if anybody would like some.
Yeah, speaking of water, we
Yeah,
it's not Brazos,
Would you like
it's
some?
not Brazos water.
Anybody else? All right.
Great.
Yes, ma'am. That's why you have a desalinization plant right here, right over the bridge. The city of Granbury, they have to take the salt out of that water before it's drinkable. One of the forks of the Brazos is known as the salt fork out in West Texas. It picks up salt from the soil, and again, like some of the other creeks around here, like the Biloxi and the Leon River.
Yeah.
Leon,
You're welcome.
And rivers from like Eastland down to Cordell County down there. Leon is better water, so there were a lot more Native American encampments along the Leon than there are the Brazos, because the Brazos were drinking water. And that's a topic for another story, but I love talking about that too. I'll get you back here and tell you about the archaeology along the Brazos River. But that's not our topic today, so yes, sir.
How did Granbury get the name from the general Granbury, right? And this name on the grave marker is B-E-R-R-Y.
You know, and I'm not an expert on that, but I've, read a couple of stories. It's my understanding that at some point, Hiram Granbury, he arbitrarily changed it for whatever reason. And I've heard or read, I guess, there's one story that says, oh, he got mad at some of his family members and wanted to do that. And then I've heard, no, that's not the case. He just started spelling it B-U-R-Y instead of B-E-R-R-Y. But we got somewhere. We have a signature, a family signature of Granbury, and then it is B-U-R-Y. So.
Mary Kate and I talked one time, Mary Kate Durham, about that, and I think that when he was writing his name one time, instead of making the loop in, the E, and the top part of the R, it came out looking.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. I mean, if you look at the signature we got, it's a little hard to tell whether it's B-E-R or B-U-R. But nevertheless, he did.
Well, I heard.
There must have
It's
been
more
more.
of a regional thing, because if you look at up north,
Yeah.
it's B-E-R-R-Y, and down the south, it's spelled B-U-R-Y. So I think it's more of a regional translation.
Yeah, I just like
Yeah.
those stories.
Now, we'll bring Melinda into that conversation. Melinda, why did Hiram Granbury switch the spelling?
Well, what I've been able to find out, and it's a hunt, a continuing journey. But, we know that the original county formation papers that came from the state say Granbury B-E-R-Y, okay? Then, at some point in the process, the state and the local people here began using the B-U-R-Y spelling. I believe it came after it was discovered. I remember published a newspaper for a short time down by Waco. And in that newspaper, he spelled it B-U-R-Y. And so we know that was his preferred spelling of the name. And I think that, that once they realized that, if there was a correction made at the state level, some of his relatives in Tennessee and, back in the deep south, they continue to use the B-R-R-Y, but the ones that came further west, most of them used the B-U-R-Y. So I don't know, if that was kind of to distinguish themselves for the people back home or what. But that's all I can tell you, because that's all I know.
Cool.
Any other questions or comments about the selection of Granbury at the town site? If not, I've got a couple other things I'd like to tell you. Yes,
Well, you're saying the center, it was just an area around Comanche Peak, it wasn't a community or something?
No, ma'am, I mean, in Buell's book, in Buell's history of the county, he said it was just referred to as the center, and it was somewhere west of Comanche Peak. But I've not found anything any more specific than that. So, but that was just like what people called it. Just like they called Andy Walker's place and Stockton and stuff. But since y'all are the inaugural group of this series, two things I want to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit how we came up with this idea, and then I want to get your feedback, and then we also want to invite you kind of into the History Center. I see we're about near our 30 minutes, and then we will have some more questions and answers. I've been given credit by some of the board members for kind of coming up with this concept, but since y'all are part of the original group, I want y'all kind of to know the rest of the story. We're open, the History Center is open on Saturdays from 1 to 5. And, we're always needing more docents, and I guess y'all didn't realize that maybe we may sign some of y'all up if there's the hostess, we got your name and email address. Not really, you'll have to know. But, anyway, this would have been in the fall of 2019. I know it wasn't last fall because we were closed and COVID and all that. So in the fall of 2019, and I was working here, it was my day to work, and it was in the fall, it was a cold, rainy day, and I had brought some paperwork, you know, things to read, but I was done with that by about 2 or 2:30, and so I was like dying of boredom. And so I thought, you know, I'll just post something on Facebook and say, hey, I'm down here at the History Center, come down and see me and I'll tell you a story about local history. And I thought, no, by the time I do that, by the time somebody gets down here, I'll be gone anyway. But it, you know, the idea was kind of planted that, well, maybe if we did something other than just unlock the door, you know, we'd have some people come. And I promise you I haven't been bored today. And I hope I didn't bore y'all. If I did, we'll give you a full refund of your ticket price, which I believe was $0. So, but no, we're planning on doing this monthly, and we've got a real good lineup of speakers. Now, the only thing we're struggling with is our space, as you can see. That's why we did what we did with the ticket deal. Is we said we got 20 chairs. We can't have anybody else. But we're also looking at possibly getting access to the church across the street so we can have a crowd of 50 or 100 or anything like that. So what are y'all's thoughts? Do y'all like this type?
Yes. You just teased us.
Yeah, we did. Well, I was the guinea pig, so it's only going to get better from here. I promise you.
Does the library, does their area hold that many people?
You know, I don't know. I've been to the library, of course, but I don't know that they have how much seating capacity.
Well, it's
they have.
between the old library and the new library, there's a great
They
big
have a meeting
room.
room here.
Oh yeah, you're right. I know what you're talking about.
I didn't know that.
Celebration Hall, right?
Celebration.
Well, yeah, Celebration Hall is, and here's the other thing. I mean, y'all, some of you, I'm sure, are aware, some of you may not be, but we conduct once or twice a year. Now, again, we got interrupted with COVID, but we have what we call the Ramey McAtee Lecture Series, and that's where we have bring-in speakers, well-known speakers from around Texas. Some of you, raise your hand if you've been to any of those. Anybody been to the Ramey McAtee Series? Okay. Y'all need to really, pardon?
Where?
Well, we either Granbury Live or the Opera House. Now, in November, we're going to have a play. We're going to put on a play, and it's about the formation of the Opera House, about Mary Lou Watkins. You know, Mary Lou ringing the dinner bell at the restaurant square. Now, I'm going to. September. Correct. Okay, wait. When is there's Harrigan and there's Opera House. And I get confused. This is Teresa Sim. She's on the board, and she's the smartest person I know.
I'm the smartest person you know. But we're doing a play at the Opera House about the restoration of the Opera House. Because when Cody and I graduated from high school in Granbury, the Opera House was a tomb. I mean, it hole in the roof and dirt on the floor, and living in there, it was a mess. And so it didn't always look like this. And so it's an awfully wonderful story about how the Opera House was restored and the people came together and did it. There was no government money in it. It was just a wonderful story. So that will be the last Sunday night in September. I think it's the 26th or something.
Yeah.
And the first two Sunday nights in October, like the 3rd and the 10th or something. And it's at 7 o'clock, and you'll be able to get tickets for that through the regular Opera House ticket mode. So that's September, October. And then what Cody was talking about is Stephen Harrigan was an author and a magazine contributor many times, and he wrote this big book. It's about this big, you know, it's like this, and it's called The Big Wonderful Thing. And it's the story of Texas history from when God created the earth. I mean, it's so inclusive. It's just a wonderful story. And Stephen is coming on Thursday, November the 3rd, and doing the 4th. See, it takes all of us. November the 4th, Thursday. And so we're going to do that at Granbury Live. And And then after he reviews his book, we'll have a book signing and a wine and cheese thing. And then Saturday and Sunday right after that, November 6th and 7th, will be the Granbury's 150th birthday party celebration, sesquicentennial, and it'll be right across the street at Lincoln Square. So Cody mentioned about Friends of the Bridgeton History Center, and it is a membership organization. It's got small dues, but it does help support the History Center. And from that group of people is where we have opportunities to be docents or, whatever things we've got going on. And we do a lot of stuff outside the walls of the History Center, even though our mission statement is to collect, preserve, and interpret the life stories of the people of Granbury and Hood County and to examine how they illuminate the history of America. That doesn't mean that it has to start in these rooms. I mean, we do have some artifacts, but we're a storytelling museum. So, I mean, we had a Civil War symposium a few years ago, and we took a bunch of people. Well, it was just the Friends that got to do this. Elizabeth Crockett's land that she inherited because David died at the Alamo is out at John and Becky Brumley's property, and it's their private property. They own all of the land that Elizabeth inherited. And so they allowed us to bring the Friends out there and have a wine and cheese party and to crawl all over the buildings and go down to the baptismal at the creek and see the school spot. And it was just, an honor to get to be able to do that. But that was just for the Friends. So they paid. Yeah. Anyway, so we do a lot of things for that. One other thing I wanted to ask you to do when you leave is right to this side of the front door is our guest book. And if you'll just put your name, you don't have to do any other, identifying information. We just like to see how many who came, stuff like that. So please sign the guest book. And does anybody want a Friends application?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
It's an application for becoming a friend of the Bridge Street History Center.
Acclaimed historian. Well, she knows all the buildings around Granbury. She has. Let me look at
No, I just know.
Okay, but Mary's gonna be one of our presenters at the local meals by local folks. So I'm gonna let her give you just a brief summary of what she's gonna do.
Next month, I want to give a teaser for the next one, in case you want to come back. What I'm going to call it, I think, see what you all think, is a special sense of place. What led about the building of Granbury, the building of Granbury, the way we know it now, the people and the culture that led to this special charm that we all love. So that's what I'm going to talk about. The way the square looks now, what led to that, the buildings that are there, what led to the buildings that are here today. And then, I don't know if Melinda wants to talk about the follow-up in September.
I'm gonna be following Mary, and we're gonna backtrack a little bit because between A and what Mary's gonna be talking about, there was the Great Granbury land dispute. And basically, what I'm gonna be talking about is what caused Granbury to be about 10 years later in developing those wonderful buildings we have because of this big blah-hoo-wah that happened. We're gonna talk about basically how it all came to happen from the time that Abel was county judge, moving forward for about the next 15 years. And it covers, the beginnings of the town of Granbury and the establishment of a square and how all that happened. So that's what we'll be doing in September. So hope to see a lot of you there.
Okay, we've taken about 45 minutes, which is kind of what we were planning on, unless there are more questions or observations.
I just got one
Y'all
I'm good at questions.
Fire away.
When we first moved here back in '83, the St. Helen building, I literally had to shop for books in there with a flashlight because there was like 2 single bulbs hanging. And an old woman, I mean, she was old.
Oh, yeah.
They
Clara.
lived down across from the library,
Uh-huh.
had cats.
Yep.
Clara, yeah.
Yeah, that was so unique, I just
It
loved
was,
it.
yeah.
I found a book I've been searching for, Magnificent Obsession.
Well,
What
I
was
can,
her last name? Clara,
Her son had a GTO in the front yard.
yeah, I remember
Gary.
that.
I can tell you where she lives, but I can't tell you
yeah.
what her last name.
Well,
I can't remember her
What
last name,
building
but
was
she
it
was
in?
there for years.
What building was it in?
St.
St.
Helens. She lived over next to Terry McNew, over by
Yes,
the library.
yes.
well, I'll tell you one last story, personal, since we're talking about old time Granbury. When I was, I guess this would have been in the mid-60s, I was in my teen years. And well, it was kind of when skateboards were invented, but you couldn't really buy one, you had to make them. And so my buddies and I, we would take roller skates, steel wheel roller skates, and bolt them to a board.
Did the same thing.
Did you? But you know what happens, like if you hit a pebble or a rock, it like stops. So we figured out that the hallway at the courthouse was linoleum tile. So on Sundays, we would go down to the courthouse, and I don't know if you look down at ground level, there's these little windows, and a couple of them were missing the grates on them. So we would crawl down into the basement of the courthouse, we would come up through the trap door under, and we would do our skateboards up and down the hall at the courthouse, and people would see us coming and going, crawling into the courthouse, and they'd wave. Bunch of kids breaking in the courthouse.
Graffitied it.
Yes, ma'am.
One on the, if you're not through. But I was gonna share a story about the courthouse also.
Oh, sure.
I grew up in Granbury, and, when I was growing up, we would come to town on Saturdays and go to the Palace Theater. And sometimes afterwards or before, to kill time, we'd go play at the courthouse.
Oh, yeah.
And about, when they restored the courthouse a few years back, however many years it's been, 10 maybe, something like that, they restored it, went in and, replastered all the walls and everything. They took all the plaster off of the walls upstairs, and there were names on the courthouse wall. As it turned out, it was 4 of us classmates.
Oh, my goodness.
And they contacted us, the person that worked, one of the persons that worked in the county. It was myself, Glenda Smith, I don't know if any of you know her, Jill Thompson,
Yeah.
and I can't think of the other one.
What's your name?
Barbara Lewis, used to be. I graduated in '59 from Granbury High School.
Okay.
But anyway, it was so unique, and I have pictures. I should have brought them,
Oh,
but I have
okay.
pictures. We went up there. The 4 of us went up there and took pictures of our, standing there with by the signatures, and they never did catch us.
I wish, did they leave it uncovered?
No.
Oh, that would have been unique.
Yeah,
They-
they did get some pictures, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we took pictures.
Yeah.
But
Well, I guess-
the other thing, real quickly,
Yeah. Oh, no,
I was
go
going to share. I lived in this house.
In this
In this
one?
house.
How really?
When I was 9 and 10 years old.
What was
year-
this?
what year?
It was, we left, my family, we rented it, and we lived in the entire downstairs, and a family lived upstairs.
Huh.
And we lived there about probably a year. We just rented it.
Mhm.
And I haven't been back, since I've been back in Granbury 20 years ago. I have not, this is the first time I've been back
Oh,
to
wow.
see
The
inside
front
of
room
it.
is her bedroom.
Yeah, the front room is her bedroom.
My mother, the Mangolds, lived here, and I don't even know the years. It would have been late 30s, 40s.
Yeah,
But
so
they
it's
were
later
here
for
too,
me.
yeah, Bob
Uh-huh.
Mangold, my grandmother, Patty.
Do you have an original stick horse?
Yeah, I was gonna
You
ask, was
know,
it
mine,
the Stickers?
mine is at the Hood County years ago. I didn't have any, and, my aunt, had one and gave it to me, and it's now at the Hood County, the Hood County Museum. I like that. Now, Jay Caraway has several original Mangold toy companies.
They featured
Oh,
that
did
not too long ago, and
They-
I say not too long ago, it's probably years, in the paper. They had a big article about that.
Yeah.
front page article about the stick horses.
Right,
being
well-
manufactured here.
Yeah, and actually, I'll tell this one last thing, then I'm really gonna. So, since we're on the topic of the Mango Stick Horse Factory, if you go to YouTube and go to YouTube and search for Mango Toy Factory, there's a video, it was originally a film, and you'll see right at the start, you'll see like a cute little blonde-headed boy, who would have been me, and Jake Caraway, who's on our board.
I've got the cowboy hat on.
Yeah, Jake's got the cowboy hat on, and Teresa, who spoke to you a minute ago, Teresa Sims, she was in, do what? Yeah, she was, but here's a quick story, I'll make it quick. So I didn't even know that existed. I must have been 5 or something when they filmed that. But years ago, probably 15 or 20 years ago or something, somebody was writing a story at the County News about a toy factory, and they just contacted me and, wanted to know what I had. I said, I just got some pictures, family pictures and a little memorabilia. But this was, again, kind of, as folks were starting to use the internet and email, so I Googled it, Mango Toy Factory, and something popped up about, it said Southwest Collections at Texas Tech. So I reached out to them, I had to talk to like 5 people before anybody knew what I was talking about. And finally, I got hold of the guy that was in charge, and I said, hey, I thought it was like a magazine article, I didn't know what it was. It said Steve's for small fry, Mango Toy Factory. So anyway, I finally got hold of the guy, and I said, hey, I'd like to get a copy of that article, my grandparents, the toy factory and all that. He said, oh no, it's not an article, it's a film that was, apparently, I think it was Mobil Oil, one of the big oil companies.
You're right.
Is that what it was?
A series on small business.
Yeah, they went around, it kind of reminds you of that Texas Country Reporter type deal. But anyway, so I said, I paid him to put it on, I guess then, it was videotape, and I've since had it converted to digital media, and I uploaded it to YouTube. But it's pretty interesting. It shows how they made the stick horses. And so anyway, that's it.
So it's on YouTube?
Yeah.
If you Google Mango,
Not good, well, you can Google it, but if you go to YouTube and search directly on YouTube for Mango Toy Factory.
I mean, it has quite a few employees at one time.
Yeah,
It
I
wasn't
know
just
about-
a mom and pop.
No, it was like, in fact, in that video, I think it tells, they employed like, at one time, I think it was the biggest employer in County, other than Mango School, but, and if you look closely at the very end of the video, there's a case of, I guess, stick horses, and it's got, they zoom in on the label,
We have 2.
and on the label
Thank
it
you
says
so much.
Sears, Roebuck and Company, Lima, Peru. That's the only address on it, Sears, Roebuck, Lima, Peru. So I guess to ship stick horses to Lima, Peru, you just put Sears, Roebuck, Lima, Peru, and threw it on the truck and it got there. But yeah, they sold them all over there.
That is amazing.
So thank y'all, I want to thank y'all very much, it's wonderful.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
thank y'all.